Now, I must give credit to the authors of some of these books. These books we've used a lot here for some of our pictures. Functional Neurology for Practitioners of Manual Therapy by Dr. Beck. Neuroanatomy Through Clinical Cases, Dr. Blumenfeld. Giving them a little shout out that we must do. Now, we're going to come to the old whiteboard here. And we have a very general kind of outline of our brain on both sides here. This is looking at our brain from the outside, so looking at it from here. This is looking at our brain from the inside, so if you slice me down the middle and look inside from this side, that's what this one signifies, inside, outside. Now, I got some numbers in here. Now, to a great extent, I got a lot of this memorized, but I'm going to look down at my sheet just to make sure when I'm going through some of these. And my goal here, once again, is to just give you a general overview of the different locations in our brain that can do different things and serve different purposes. Now, and as I said, as the shows go on, we're going to break down each of these different sections, and you'll find it extremely interesting, and we'll tie in how you can stimulate those sections to work better, naturally. Now, sections 1, 2, and 3, that has a lot to do here, here, and here, and it kind of comes down like this, actually, but I'm not that good of an artist, so I wasn't going to even attempt that kind of thing, as you can tell. Has a lot to do with touch and certain aspects of sensation. Number 4 has a lot to do with voluntary movement control. Me pointing up here, lifting a leg, that area of the brain there. Voluntary movement. Area 5, something such as if you, I don't know, my little brothers and I used to do this when we were little, we'd draw a letter or a number on your back and see if you can tell which number or letter that is. That's an area of the brain that allows you to be able to know that. Okay? Section 6, limb, arm or leg, and eye movement planning. Section 8, different types of eye movement as well. Section 9, 10, 11 has a lot to do with thought, thinking, figuring things out, planning those things. A lot of this frontal area of the brain. It's all interesting, but that's a really, really interesting part of things, that area in the front, personality, different things. We're going to have a whole show on that. It's going to be really, really cool. 17, section 17, back here, 17, 18, 19, vision, color, motion of what we're seeing. The back area here, the occipital lobe, early in the show we talked about that having to do with sight. Sections 20, 21, 22, 23 over here in the middle, or excuse me, on the inside, 24, have a lot to do with vision as well, hearing, speech, different emotions. Now these numbers here, quite frankly, they're called something. They're called Brodmann's areas. There's a guy named Brodmann. He put his name on this because he did a lot of the work on figuring out what sections seem to do what. All right. Now here in 39 and 40, a lot of aspects of perception, vision, reading, speech, 41, 42, 43, hearing, and taste in 43. Okay? Speech, movement, planning, thought, behaviors. A lot of that is through 44, 45, 46, 47 in areas called the prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, a lot of different names like that. A very, very interesting area that we'll talk about later on in another show. So the point being here, the point I want to get across, is there's different sections of the brain. They do different things. But what's very interesting is that for many, many, many years, just like For many years they thought the world was flat. It took a long time for them to believe that it wasn't, even when it was discovered that it wasn't. But for many years, neuroscientists felt that these areas were specifically hardwired for those different things, those different actions, those different the ability to feel things, the sight, the hearing sections. They're hardwired, they never could serve any other purpose. In the end of the show here in a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you an example where that is not really necessarily true. There is a thing called neuroplasticity. There's good neuroplasticity, there's bad neuroplasticity. But what neuroplasticity means, you can stimulate nerves and you can stimulate areas of our nervous system, areas of our brain, in certain ways, repetitively, and you will make those nerve pathways, you will make that electrical current, you will make the different stops along the highway system that electrical current or wiring or nerve pathway goes. You will make those different stops stronger. When it gets into the brain, those electrical current bounces around to different sections of the brain. It can make those different sections of the brain stronger, more responsive. We talked about sections of the brain here that have to do with personality, thoughts, planning, morals, behavior. That prefrontal cortex, the front of the frontal lobe. You can stimulate that area for the good, and you can stimulate that area for the bad. A lot of the people that you see chronically in jail, some terrible things that go on, that they've committed, some maybe not so terrible. That aspect of their brain is not working well. And there are different ways, there are potential different ways through different aspects of rehabilitation that you possibly can make those areas of the brain function more appropriately. And there is a possibility of a lot of different areas or ways that you could do that because of how the nerves receive the stimulus and eventually end up in certain parts of the brain. Once again, we're going to break that down a lot in further shows. Now I want to read you something out of a book called Train Your Brain, Change Your Mind by Susan Begley. It's a really, really interesting book. It's a book that generally reports on some of the latest, and I can't remember, the book maybe 5 years old or 8 years old or something like that. But it's a book that reports on some of the latest scientific discoveries having to do with the brain. And really it was kind of stimulated by the Dalai Lama, who every few years, in an effort to try to understand how his monks can slow down their heart so much and have these amazing kind of things that they can do, he wants to try and figure out scientifically how they can do that. And he gets together these different neuroscientists that have discovered this new stuff, and he has them come to different locations and they give a report. So it's a really, really interesting book. And this thing about neuroplasticity that I was talking about, being able to change your brain by stimulating it in different ways for the good. You can do it for the bad too if you're doing certain things, creating a habit that is not very advantageous for us. But on the good flip side of the coin, we can stimulate it in ways to have positive change. And so in an effort to validate that that can be done, I want to read you this here. This is from Change Your Brain, Train Your Mind. This was a experiment done, the paper was in 1988, by two neuroscientists at Vanderbilt University. they surgically damaged the somatosensory cortex of 7 monkeys. Now that cortex is that primary area of the brain that I showed you earlier in the show that had the different aspects of our body parts on it and the areas that perceived that sensation. So they killed off a certain area of that part of the brain that had to do with the monkey's hand. Okay? Although the nerves in the monkey's hands were intact, so the nerves out here were fine, coming up here and into the brainstem and then up to that part of the brain, all that area is intact, but the part of the brain that received that stimulus to say, hey, I felt something in my hand, had been destroyed. So the monkeys couldn't feel that. It was like having perfectly functioning phone lines, but a broken telephone. No signal registers. The damage the scientists caused was not the only change in the monkeys' brains. Now I'm going to skip down through here. 6 to 8 weeks after the monkey's brain surgery, the region in an area of the brain that registers sensations from the hand instead responded to stimulation from the animal's feet. So an area of the brain that was destroyed and another area of the brain that also had to do with feelings of the hands was not destroyed, but wasn't getting input from the primary area. So what happened here is that the foot feeling region in an area of the brain, which originally occupied 5 to 12% of this area of the feeling part of the brain, had expanded to fill 55 to 75% of that area, equal to the combined hand and foot representation in the intact brain. The brain area no longer being used by the hand had been taken over by the foot in a process called cortical remapping. Now folks, generally speaking, I've showed you a lot of different brain regions here that do different things. They're by each other. There's different areas that are close to each other. The long and short of it is, in many instances, we can stimulate areas of the brain that are adjacent or close or somewhat associated with an area of the brain that is not working very well. And by stimulating those areas that are surrounding, we can have at times a positive change in the area that is not working well. You just got to know which nerves to stimulate that go to different brain regions. And it can be done naturally. I hope I got you thinking. I think I did. We're going to expand on this kind of thing, and it's really going to be fun. You'll find it extremely interesting. I want to thank you for joining me this week, and we'll see you next week back here on Naturally Healthy. I'm Dr. Craig Steingraber here at the Summit Healthplex. Thank you. To view past shows, access YouTube with keyword Dr. Craig Steingraber DC to learn more about living naturally healthy.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
My nerves stand on end. Everything's a blur. And all I want to do is get even higher.
Andrea Moretti is under the influence of her local teen center volunteer. She helps Andrea stay on top of the world and off drugs. Be a coach, a mentor, a volunteer, because you have something to offer.
Disasters like floods, fires, and earthquakes can be devastating, but you can take steps to keep your family safe. Get an emergency supply kit. Make a family emergency plan and practice it together. Be prepared for the different types of emergencies that could happen in your community.